Ivor Cummins has brilliantly explained in his videos the Casedemic phenomenon.
So Casedemics, we've had this hysteria in the UK and Ireland and all over Europe actually from June to September 2020. And a casedemic, quite simply, can be shown here. In a real epidemic, you have cases rising and falling by the viral curve, largely independent of lockdowns. And now we have, coming into autumn, cases rising rapidly. But a lot of these are due to false positives, which we'll discuss in a moment. But let's look at the deaths. In the real epidemic, they rose, sadly. The susceptible were affected. But the epidemic was over, really, in May 2020. Let's look now at the impacts in a casedemic. And as you can see, you can barely see them. There's still less than one person per million per day with a positive PCR test sadly passing. So that's a casedemic. This is a very important article, and there are many now, on false positives from the PCR test. So I'll explain. Here we have the epidemic back in March, April. UK is in purple there. That was indeed an epidemic and very sad impacts. Out here at the end of May coming into June, it's no longer an epidemic by any reasonable definition because the impacts are falling right down. But if you keep testing with PCR tests, as the authorities seem to have been pushing, you'll get yourself a casedemic, which we indicated a few minutes ago. Let's look at the PCR tests. If you're doing 10,000 PCR tests in a day, and the UK is doing 250,000, but let's say 10,000, and you get 100 positives, that's kind of scary. And feed these all in, and you got a casedemic. But what if we were scientific, and we thought about the actual data and the science? Well, then we'd realise that 50 to 90 of these, 100, could be false positives at a sensitivity of 99.2%. That's just the math. Another bunch are old fragments of virus from maybe an infection a month or more ago, so they're meaningless as well. You could have trivial positives, genuine fragments of virus, but no transmissibility, and they're going to be gone in a couple of weeks without any transmission, so they're trivial, they don't count for anything. And you will have some concerning positives in there at a very low rate of people who are transmissible or symptomatic and may be relevant. This is the number that should be taken out from the 100 and fed in to the tracking to look at preventative measures if necessary. Then you wouldn't have a casedemic though, really, would you? So you got to ask the question of your authorities, because they're using all 100 here inappropriately. Why are they doing this? There were 12,000 tests done per day back in the actual epidemic in the UK, and now there's around 250,000 a day. That's one huge driver for the casedemic. More than 20 times more testing than April. In terms of cases, there were 700 back here when the tracking started July. These are PCR positives being called cases, but they're not cases. As I mentioned to you, they're PCR positives, viral fragments. Cases are people who are symptomatic or hospitalised. So that's a big obfuscation. But anyway, it's up to 7,100 of these so-called cases. So that's very scary. Let's remove now and look at the impact again, coincident with all of these cases. And we can see that almost nothing is happening. Around 0.6 deaths per million people per day in the UK carrying some viral fragments.
The casedemic situation is happening across Europe right now, including in Ireland, and increased PCR testing, which is rife with false positives and also detects fragments of dead coronaviruses that most people have, as well as immunity for COVID-19. This is what's being used to justify the curtailment of some of the most basic human rights. By the way, in the UK, flu and pneumonia killed 10 times more Brits than coronavirus again last week.